Welcome to all the gallery. Just a very short prelude to Mary's talk. On Sunday, I have managed to get a very, not exaggerating, very rare copy of Franco Zeffirelli's documentary called Florence Days of Destruction, made 1966. He was in Florence with Elizabeth Burton and Richard Taylor Richard Burton. And filming Taming of the Shrew. The floods hit, over 100 people drowned, and not thousands but millions of books, manuscripts, books, artworks were either destroyed or severely damaged. It is so in the film we'll run it through here, scratching it on the scale, never hit the floor. So that will be screening here free on Sunday at 1 p.m. If you're a little bit put off by parking in the city, we have a free 1 hour parking deal with Victoria Street Car Park. It's not the one across the road, it's down the street about 150 metres. The first hour is free. Bring your little parking voucher in with you every weekend or any public holiday, and ask a gallery assistant to run it through their machine, and that just wipes off in an hour. Okay? And if you want to keep up with what's going on by offering in terms of art bites, and also our other programs and films that are coming up for the long weekend. We've got an Italian language weekend based around Corsini, and I'm considering very strongly on Monday, due to there's so much I told you about, so much talk about can we do it again, is we'll re-screen A Room with a View. So I'll try and find some. And Mary, where was it?
Contessa Lucrezia, if you go into the Robertson 5 gallery in the Corsini show, she's in the far right, she's the modern portrait,
yes.
The daughter of Elena, the one that's done in pastel. And it was filmed in her palazzo, which is just above Villa Itati, below Senignano, where I was working last year.
There we go. You had to throw that in, didn't you? You just had to throw it in. To the left there. Please welcome our Senior Curator, Mary Kisler.
A topic very dear to my heart is food, its preparation and presentation. And of course we have aspects of that in the exhibition, but there's a lot that's been written over time about the importance of the representation of food in Renaissance painting and Renaissance writing, and much earlier indeed than that. And first archaeological museum. But food and its preparation has always had a great degree of ritual about it. And in most cultures, there are symbolic meanings to a lot of food as well. They don't all share the same importance. We may think they taste the same and they are delicious, but they don't necessarily mean the same. And I've just put up on this first screen here, of course, a shot of the dresser that we have in the exhibition. These are the copper pots and pans and jelly moulds, cake moulds that have been sent out from Palazzo Corsini. There's a little detail on the left that I'd like you to note, which is actually a photograph from inside a Florentine house. And it just shows a niche. The whole ritual and the business of storing and maintaining the freshness of food is always extremely important. And often wines and oils were stored, and vinegars were stored in terracotta vases or pots like this, often with a cloth dipped in wax stuffed in the top to try and keep the air out. And we'll see more of that anon. Now, these are two early examples in Renaissance painting that show details of preparing food. And you can see that they are very, very simple in their approach. On the left, you have a servant who's kneeling in front of a very plain open fire. She is stirring a dish, and she has a tray beside her, and another servant coming in with one of those terracotta jars I just showed you, in this case a jug because it has a handle, and being carried in on her head. How many countries in the world carry jars like this on their heads, or carry food for its preparation? So she has two pots on the go, blackened of course by the smoke from the fire. And that's just a very simple detail. The detail on the right tells us a little bit more, because whereas on the left you have the beginnings of a meal, on the right you have the end of it. Now this is a combination of both the sacred and profane, because there is a detail from the Last Supper. I haven't shown you all of that, you can just see one single little aspect of it here. So this is a sacred space, even though the Last Supper is taking place inside a recognisable 15th century Italian interior. But it's this narrow detail, which is crammed full of information, that is equally fascinating. Here you've got a storage area very high up, very important when you couldn't control vermin. And of course, both the cat and the dog down here sort of squabbling over who gets the last plate to lick, please don't ask me to that banquet, serve important roles in keeping mice and rats away. But what is also interesting here is that you have a male servant who will help to dry the dishes. But another servant has popped in through the door, we imagine from the space itself, perhaps requesting some more water or some more wine. And it became quite common to have this juxtaposition in a painting, a single work, much as I've talked about before, because it allowed people to read the work as important to their time. And of course I say read deliberately because, as I mentioned before, so many people looking at works of art like this were illiterate. They had to read the painting to understand it. Another important development was the writing of books that encouraged the use of good practice in the acquisition of food and in its storage and its preparation and its eating. So there were various rituals about each of those stages. And these are details from a wonderful book written around 1385 called the Tacurinum Sanitatis, or the Book of Good Health. And acquiring food and looking after it properly and cooking it properly, of course, was beneficial to good health. But what these little images do is that they give us great detail about buying food in the marketplace. So on the left you have your baker, and you can see that the pizza oven, or the bread oven as it is there, is very much the same as the same pizza ovens that are used today. Although of course here, like my one up north, there you burn wood inside them, and there are many in big restaurants of course today that use gas rather than wood, but you never get the same flavour of course. Now you've got the a working woman selling bread, which she has laid out here in a pile, to this little servant boy who's come along, and she's got a basket in the background, again up on a high shelf to protect it from vermin and also just to keep it out of the way, but the basket is empty. And if you look across here at the fish cellar, you'll see again a different kind of boat, as well as a barrel came up the river. Some was caught from the river, but sea fish had to be brought up the river on a boat from Pisa. And the best way, if you weren't going to salt it so that it could last a long time, was to bring it in either woven baskets that were lined probably with leather, that were waterproof, that would keep the fish alive until they arrived at the marketplace or at the fish shop. And here you've got barrels where the fish instead are salted. And today you can still, often they're kept in tins of course today, but you can go to any good fish shop, and the most popular one, that apart from anchovies, which of course come in the little tins, is bacalao or the salt cod, which once it's caught is laid down in salt and it will keep for a long time. It looks a bit like white cardboard until it's soaked for 2 or 3 days and constantly changing water, but it's absolutely delicious once it's prepared. You've also got here the servant, the small servant boy, trying to get a word in edgeways. But this customer is obviously far more important, and he can afford to buy a very big fish. So they're obviously telling him about how fresh it is and how delicious it will be, and possibly discussing how it's going to be cooked. And then you have on the left-hand side this scene of cooked tripe. Now, it may not seem so delicious to us, but in France and Italy, tripe is considered a delicacy to waste it. Strong spices were the way to disguise the taste. And of course, heat didn't help as far as that was concerned. And what you have here is the spice box. This is actually, these are for candles. So this is the kind of vertical candelabra that you would have possibly either side of a cooking bench or either side of the fire. And of course, if you were getting things off high shelves, you would hope to do it in daylight, because it was much more uncertain a task once it got dark. But you've got this sort of grill here that you can put over an open fire to toast things. Again, these various spears attached to the spit, and again, hooks and things that are useful for moving equipment. A great big wooden shovel that would have been used for putting bread down. This is a grater, but it's on wheels, and I suddenly thought, why don't we have those anymore? Imagine if you've got a shallow dish that you want to grate cheese over. How brilliant it would be to actually have a grater that you could move along so that you got an even grating of cheese. And again, if you tea towel or a cloth to wipe your sticky hands on, and particularly if you're handling slippery fish, the light strikes the face of the cook, but it really emphasises the strength of his arms. That is, it has a sort of didactic quality. It teaches us how to cut a fish. But of course, this sort of painting could never have come about in Italy if Flemish and Dutch artists hadn't come to Rome and to other cities and introduced that notion of still life. Now, in this work by Vincenzo Campi, we get another kitchen scene, much more busy, many people, and you can even see that a servant setting the table for a banquet here. But this is a slightly different kind of painting, because what we have here is a very bountiful young servant woman smiling at the cat and dog who are fighting over the scrap, probably chicken guts that she's just taken out of the chicken before trussing its legs here, and she's preparing it in this dish. But often in paintings like this, there's a slight lasciviousness, a sort of sense that the desire for food can also symbolise lust. You've got this woman here who's put her finger to her mouth, and she's holding what looks to be perhaps some kind of grinder. This little boy is sitting, it may be hard to make out, but he's sitting on an upturned sieve. He has very red cheeks, and whether he's actually drinking wine from that skin or not, or whether he's actually blowing the skin up to fill it with something, we cannot tell. But it's a very witty little inclusion. You've got here this very focused servant who's forcing the chickens down onto the spit. You've got a woman in the background who's checking all of the tarts that have been laid out in front of the credenza. And further up here you've got some sort of pasta that's been rolled out over a rolling pin. So you do have that didactic quality, that teaching quality in the work as well. But this woman looking back, bending over, and it's rather hard to make out exactly what she's doing here, but she's got one plucked bird strung up here. But she's looking back slightly disapprovingly at this figure. So it's as if she's a figure of modesty, and she perhaps is slightly naughtier in her symbolism. Now, in that last picture, you saw that very big credenza with the display of plate on it. And this became extremely popular, particularly in paintings from Venice. And here you've got the same kind of credenza piled up very, very high. You've got a table with food being put onto it. But what's interesting about this print is you've got the real focus is still on the preparation of food. So again, you have a servant who's actually taking something, either putting it on the fire or taking it off. You've got this man carrying a big faggot of wood, and of course you've got exactly that detail included in the execution of Savonarola in the exhibition upstairs. And here you have a whole line of servants round the table, making sure that all the dishes are ready for serving. And here, this is actually created as a sort of an allegory of the month. So this is January, one of the winter months, and the food that would be prepared at that particular in that particular season. And now we have a photograph of a real 15th century dining room. This is the dining room in Palazzo Davanzati that I mentioned earlier. And what's beautiful about this and unusual is that the walls are frescoed, floor to ceiling, but they're frescoed as if they have hangings hanging from that particular railing here. And you can actually see the loop. Each part of the hanging ties up or hooks onto some sort of hook. But this is actually done in fresco. Whereas, as we know from earlier talks, often real tapestries were hung, particularly in the winters. So you have a big fireplace on both sides to keep the food, to keep the room warm, but a very, very simple table in the centre. And the fireplace again has this wonderful triangular almost chimney breast, which we've seen in so many images before. Now, the painting of banquets really became popular through the depiction of the Last Supper, the marriage at Cana, and the feast in the house of Levi. They were three biblical themes where you could show a banquet. The Last Supper inevitably would be was fairly simple, but the marriage at Cana became popular because it depicted Christ's first miracle, where they are at this banquet and the worst thing that can happen to any host, they ran out of wine. So the Virgin Mary commanded her son to turn water into wine, and he promptly did so. Now they're not sitting together here. You have Christ at the very end of the table, raising his hand and telling the surprised servant that he should pour from the wine vessels. And whereas here, you've got one man holding the jug of wine, and this person tasting it to see if it truly is, that it isn't just the water that they've carried in the containers. But again, it's a wonderful opportunity to add in little profane details. So here you have, this is the weirdest looking little dog I've ever seen, whereas this one is far more identifiable. But of course, dogs were a long time symbol of fidelity. And the symbolism of cats and dogs goes way back to the Egyptians and other pre-Christian cultures. And of course, in Egypt, they worshipped the cat as well as the dog. But there are far more, something like 27 references to dogs in both the Old and the New Testament, and there's one reference to a cat. So the cat becomes, particularly in the later Middle Ages and the Renaissance, it can sometimes have a positive symbolism, but often it's associated with lust, and therefore seen sometimes as an attribute of women, because we know that men are never lustful. Now this is a much more grand and eloquent and mystical painting, because of course it's much later. This is Jacopo Tintoreto's The Last Supper, which is in the Frari in Venice. And this is a wonderful image. It's a banquet scene, of course, but it's brilliant in that it is a nighttime scene. And it breaks down the secular space of the Last Supper and the preparation of the supper. And you see here piled up, you have dishes of fruit and possibly bread, but it's a very simple supper. Very extreme in its gestures, so it's sort of a cusp work between the Renaissance and the Baroque. But in particular, you have this breaking down of the space so that the heavens break through the recognisable coffered ceiling that you see in houses all over Italy at the time, with a very high ceiling here. So you have the world of the angels bursting through and witnessing the miracle of the Last Supper, when finally Christ is recognised. But perhaps the grandest banquet scene that I could find for you is the Marriage of Cana by Paolo Veronese, which is now in the Louvre in Paris, painted in 1563. And this is an absolutely monumental work. But if you look closely at it, you can see many aspects that link through to that much simpler painting that I showed you before. Here now, though, Christ is seated at the very middle of the table. His mother sits beside him, and there is only one other woman sitting at the table. You have the water being poured and the man tasting it, as we'd seen in that earlier work. You have the inclusion of dogs in the foreground. But it is so crammed with detail that you have to look very closely to see a lot of what's going on. Here you have an angle that you have to look closely to even notice that it is there. And you have here a whole range of figures. Now, of course, Venice, as I've talked before, was a great centre of trade, and particularly trade with the East. So there are figures here that could be read as witnesses from the Old Testament, looking at something that happens in Christ's lifetime. But Veronese loved to introduce exotic figures from Turkey into his works. It's a very extreme foreshortening of the table, and it's a much grander banquet than the ones that you saw before. And that's just a detail on the right to show you that plate stacked up, and you get the same kind of detail in this work on the left. Now, there's just small examples of the kind of goblets and knives. Here we have a knife introduced and a fork, and of course forks were quite rare until around 1500. But what I love is this little egg cup on the right. So they were eating boiled eggs then. And another detail from another of Veronese's paintings is this woman using a toothpick after she's eaten possibly some meat or some fish. And these very, very beautiful jars that you see on the right. But you also get the introduction of cookery books, and the most famous one was written by Bartolomeo Scarpi, and it was called Book of the Art of Cooking in 1577. And you've got the cover there, and you'll recognise exactly the same kind of prints that I've shown you already. But you also, this is a book that is divided, it's a text that's divided into 6 books. Very, very important. And this leads, it was translated into numerous languages, and this leads us back to the exhibition. One of the things that we suggested, because they'd said they had cooking, the family had cooking equipment, was how wonderful it would be to have a dining table. And they sent us this, the seating for the dining table and the chairs, and a Bordeaux tablecloth. Now this is a French table setting, even though the ceramics on the table are Chinese porcelain. The knives and forks, the cutlery, are all French. It's called vermeil, and it's silver dipped in gold, but with a decorated enamel handles. And on the wall of the exhibition, you've got the menu for a banquet held at Palazzo Corsini on the 22nd of March 1857. And I've written it out for you in English, but first there was game soup with barley and hard-boiled yolks of eggs cut in small pieces, oyster soup and hors d'oeuvres and little pâtés, and then there was fish with shrimp hollandaise, fillet of beef and Madeira sauce and vegetables, sorry there's 2 V's there, chicken breast and cream sauce, lamb cutlets in the Perigord style, chilled fillets of woodcock and aspic, truffles and champagne served with Roman punch, and then for the main course, there was roast guinea fowl with asparagus and hollandaise sauce, lobster and aspic and garnished ham, and then you finished off with warm English pudding, cheese mousse, Neapolitan cake and Russian jelly. I suppose you might have had a choice from one of those. But between the dishes, the table, where it says releves, that's when they reset the table. So once the first course is over, everything gets taken off the table, apart from your wine glasses, and everything is set again. But the exhibition also has the little recipe book written by Antonietta Corsini in 1881 when she was about 17, and she died the year after. One of the, not all of the recipes look to me as if they would work, but if you go and look at the iPads in the exhibition, you can actually turn the pages. But this is a recipe for pan dolce, or Christmas bread, which is very like pan forte, not quite as aerated, but I actually found a photograph of it to show you, and you have to make it 10 days before Christmas, and you have to say a special prayer when it's cut on Christmas Day, and this year I'm going to make it. And finally, I've just got you some photographs from Villa Le Corti, the villa where the prince lives, and these show the same sort of terracotta barrels here with wooden lids that are stored inside in one of the long rooms. That what you can make a visit now and go to the restaurant and go to the vineyard, and this is the kitchen in the upper right, and you can see it's got the same kind of chimney. It's actually also got an olive press. This is not a living animal, but it's wonderful that you can go. So they've turned it into a kind of museum, and here you can see the Principessa with the same kind of oven that I showed you in one of those very early paintings. So they're still using it as a pizza oven. Here, they've got wood stored here and there, but these might have had jars in the old days. That's a pizza tray to go into the oven. And here you've got people who've paid to come for the day and have a cooking class. They're making pasta, and examples of what they can make. But if you think of what we've got up in the exhibition, they've got these wonderful displays of copper utensils on the shelves as well. And importantly, a great big cast iron stove, because if you go upstairs and look at those round, flat padellas, you would take the cast iron lid out of the stove and you would lay the copper over that with the copper, and then you would cook like riddle scones on the flat surfaces. So I'm going to stop there because Kim's told me I'm not allowed to go over because they've got a film they're showing at 1 o'clock. But thank you very much for coming. Thank you.